Welcome to the Pivot Point Podcast. This season, I'm focused on real-time hot topics in the gender equality and diversity spaces. In this episode, I will break down a current event, provide my point of view, what I liked and what I'd like to see change, and leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. I share this information because equality is a candid conversation. It takes bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together. We are one. So let's dig into this week's episode. I watched one of the new Netflix documentaries over the weekend, and I've been noodling on it and thinking about it and how to share this message. And I thought this could be this week's hot topic. So if you haven't heard of it, it just recently came out a week ago. It is called Knock Down the House. We will be sure to link to it in the show notes. So Knock Down the House is a documentary about the recent Congress in the United States, the election. And so they followed 4 women that were campaigning to win a House seat. So all of them, in fact, Democratic, which that tends to be a trend of women representing that party. But it was really interesting. Of the 4, spoiler alert, only one won. And the story has really captured the attention, I think, of the nation of what does it take to win? You know, what does it take a grassroots campaign? Because in many cases, it's women that do not have a background in politics. Or, you know, does it take experienced teams helping you? And in this case, they followed a young bartender from the Bronx, a coal miner's daughter in West Virginia, a grieving mother in Nevada, and a registered nurse in Missouri. And they talk about collectively working together to advance candidates that may otherwise not have a chance to run successfully and getting attention. And so it was fascinating to me to see the perceptions of women versus men in these campaigns, what their male counterparts were allowed to say versus what they were permitted to say. For example, one of the candidates that won has really gotten a lot of attention since she's taken her place in Congress. Her name's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, if you want to follow her. It's fascinating. At one spot in the documentary that I just want to draw attention to, that you'll have to check it out and see it, it's towards the end. She has a debate with an established incumbent. You know, her incumbent in office, white male, had been in the district for 14 plus years, actually didn't even live in that district though, which is interesting. And she did. And so that was a really strong point for her campaign. But when he did finally show up to one of the debates, there was this comment that was made about her being in the room with a man that was expressing some bad behavior. I'll just put it that way. And she said, why do I have to be responsible for some other man's behavior? You know, often women get that comment of, well, why were you there? Why did you let someone talk to you that way? And she thought, I loved that turning point of saying and flipping it and saying, testing that, you know, why do I have to be responsible for someone else's behavior? As a woman, why do we assume that women have to correct people or somehow have to know which rooms not to go into or which people to distance themselves from? And so you got to watch more, because there's all sorts of moments like that where there's opportunities for what I call the flip it to test it model. This is something that Kristen Pressner shared on a TED Talk that I'll also link to in the show notes. And you know, if it were a man, would we say the same thing? And why do we put that burden on women? And so fast forward to today. So we're 5 months into this new wave of women in Congress, and there was a considerable increase, 15% increase overnight in women in Congress from 2018 to 2019. Yet I like to point this out. I'm afraid to celebrate that, because the percentage of the total is really only up 20.6% to 23.7%. So we're still not even at a quarter. And when you look at women of color, you know, the story is far worse. I actually had a debate with my father-in-law over the weekend about some of these statistics. And I think this falls into the majority group, older white men in particular, who I affectionately call my allies. This is not an attack. There's a perception that things are changing. And while I would agree, a 3% increase overall is not something I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to ask for more on that. And it's still quite sad that we're still there. However, there is this perception by the majority group that there is no problem, that things are changing. And to combat that perception, I like to look at the statistics of our country overall. If you look at it from a race perspective, we're sitting around 61% in the quote unquote white Caucasian category, roughly about 13% African Americans, about 18% Latino Americans, and the balance is other ethnicities. Congress does not look like that. Congress is way more than 61% white. And then when you look at it from a gender perspective, obviously 50-50 is not happening either. And so holistically, our country is being managed by people that don't resemble the actual fabric and perceptions and values and ethnicities and genders of the people that are in it. And that's a problem. I often share that information with organizations, companies I'm working with that want to improve diversity and inclusion. I ask them what their customer base looks like. If your customer base looks vastly different than your employee base and certainly your leadership team base, that's a problem. If you're out of sync and you're not working towards that, 18% Latino, for example, and that number is vastly increasing and forecasted to be much, much higher in the coming years. If you're not working to diversify your workforce so that it looks and mirrors your customer base, you're going to be out of sync. You're going to be communicating in ways that don't resemble what people want to hear. Maybe don't resemble their values. They certainly want to look around and see people that look like them, perhaps that have similar backgrounds to them. And we all know the power of diversity, right? You wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't know the statistics around diverse teams significantly outperforming those that are non-diverse. So think about that as a challenge from today's episode as far as translating this to actionable tips in your workplace. I would encourage you to think about, what does your customer base look like? How can we work to mirror what our customer base looks like with our employees and our leadership team and our board and our C-suite, looking at all layers of the organization. There's usually pockets of more majority group dominated areas, like engineering tends to happen the way technology, information systems. I hear that. How can we round out those teams so that they're truly getting a diverse perspective and again, mirroring our customers? And I think this example from United States Congress really points to that change takes time. This documentary is getting attention. I think we can learn about grassroots campaigns. And is this the future of politics? Is this the way that we're going to advance people that otherwise don't have the same leg up? They don't have that same P word. Remember privilege from last week's episode. They're less likely to run because they don't know that they even can. And that's what's fascinating, is putting people in a position to catapult them with their allies around them and having partnership groups that are supporting people that would otherwise just not even think that they had a chance. So how can we get underrepresented groups to really buy in and believe that they have a chance? Same goes for your organization. Likely those that look different, that think different, have different backgrounds, probably don't look up and see themselves represented in the organization. How can you ask them about their experiences? How can you ask them about the barriers they're facing every day? How can you ask them about career advancement opportunities that they may otherwise think they're not qualified for? How can you help them understand that they are, or prepare them better for those positions if they truly are not? think about what we can learn from this evolution of more women coming into politics. I would argue things are changing. It's a very, very minute change. We're seeing some of the backlash come from some of these women that are stepping out. Certainly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, there's a perception of she speaks up quite a bit, and people aren't as comfortable with that. Certainly maybe because she's a woman, I would argue. Certainly a woman of color on top of that creates a whole different set of expectations of what we want to see. And our discomfort with people acting in ways that we're not used to. So, challenge your own bias in the moment. Let's make sure this backlash is short-lived. Bring these tips inside your organization. And again, just think about, what could we do to help underrepresented groups? How could we leverage some of the learning points from what we're seeing with this documentary, with women in politics? How could we help advance women and people of color inside our organization? So I'll leave you with some of those thoughts. We'll link to the Netflix special, the statistics on women in Congress, and that the Flip It to Test It TED Talk in the show notes. And we encourage you to take these tools back to your organization. The learning happens when you use this and have powerful conversations. As an ally, lean into this tough conversation. We're here for you. We'll be back next week with another hot topic. Did you know that you can find all 3 seasons of our 40+ episodes at nextpivotpoint.com? And you can sign up for our next free online workshop, get access to our 5 questions to get the gender equality conversation started in your organization, and ask me, Julie, your questions directly. I appreciate you listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button, connect with me on Instagram at nextpivotpoint, and connect with me and follow me on LinkedIn. I post daily. Julie Kratz, Kratz. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together, that we are one.